building. In the event that we need to evacuate, we would actually move to these elevators and go down to the main level, level 1, and exit out the building right on the 17th Street side. In the event that we needed to shelter for severe weather, we would be escorted most likely to the call center area, which is a secured area. Another guest would be asked to go down to the garage area in this room anyway. In the event of a fire, please don't use the elevators. So we would use the steps and go all the way down to the main level, then exit out the building. The AD and the first aid kit are one on top of each other, just to the right of the elevators. The fire extinguisher is right here. There's also one down at the end of the hall. And the, which was pointed out at our senior management meeting yesterday, the fire pole, there's two of those. One is down at the end of the hall and to the left. The other one is just to my left here. As you are going down the steps, there's a fire extinguisher pole there in the event of a fire. If you have a medical condition, please write it down or tell your neighbor. And is anybody here certified in the use of an AED or in CPR? So we have several that are here. In the event of emergency, could we have somebody call 911? So Mark, could you call 911? And
one person?
And I'll have Kevin call 3700 in the event of that, if that'd be okay. So with that, that concludes our safety briefing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. First, we have finance. Mr. Gay.
Good morning. We just have two items, some financial report for March and then access to credit markets monitoring report. So I'll have Javier walk us through that.
Very good morning, everyone.
Morning.
I'm happy to report the March 2019 monthly financial summary. It also, as I speak to the March results, I'm going to touch on a few year-to-date results, which marks the first quarter of 2019. I am happy to report that this is a boring month. And boring is usually good in the finance world, but certainly not boring from an operations perspective, and I'm going to tie those two together. Retail revenues for March were $72 million, which is just $1.6 million under budget. We're tracking budget pretty well so far on revenues. Off-system sales revenues were $11.7 million, which is $6.2 million over budget. A combination of both more volume of power sold into the market and higher prices than what we had budgeted. It's a combination of those two. Remember that these figures usually offset by the other end of the spectrum, which is purchase power. But on the off-system revenues, we were $6.2 million over budget. A notable item here is other income for March was $13 million, which is $6.4 million over budget. We continue to observe the same story that we observed last year, and this has to do with interest rates going up and down. And as you remember, all of our investments have to be reported on a mark-to-market basis. Doesn't mean that we're liquidating any investments, doesn't mean that our expectation for income is changing. However, interest rates did drop from the beginning of March to the end of March, causing the mark-to-market of those securities to increase. That means that if we had liquidated all of our securities, we would have realized the gain. And so that explains the $6.4 million over budget on other income. Conversely, the same could happen if interest rates rise during the month. We could have the exact effect, the opposite effect on the other end. By and large, I would say our investment strategy is a buy and hold strategy. So typically these ups and downs don't necessarily affect that much the actual income we receive from these securities for the most part. The operation and maintenance expenses, this is, I want to take a moment to give a shout out not only to the organization, but this is a bragging moment for the Financial Services Business Unit. Our Financial Services Business Partners and our budget team has done a phenomenal job in the past, I would say 24 months. And as evidenced by the operation and maintenance expenses for the month of March were $32 million, which is $400,000 over budget. We have been tracking budget to actuals incredibly well, and this is a testament to all of my peers, all of the VPs working with their business partners, getting really close to their budgets and being able to match and execute the budgets with a high degree of accuracy. Now, these, as you all remember, and I'm sure Tim is going to talk about these later on, we experienced a very large event in the month of March. That was a flood of 2019. We are still recovering. So during the flood event, when we were doing a lot of mitigation and preparation for the flood, there was quite a bit of overtime that we invested, quite a bit of additional materials and services. All of those are included in this figure. Yet even with that event, we are still tracking pretty close to budget. I think that speaks volumes to financial resiliency, whereas by having a financially healthy organization, we're able to withstand this type of events and really don't miss a beat when it comes to financials. I don't want to underplay the operations and all the other huge efforts that we're going to have to do to help restore the region, but from a financial perspective, we held pretty well. Fuel and purchase power expenses for March were $32.2 million, which is $10.2 million over budget. About $6 million of that is just normal, expected. We bought more power at higher prices, just as we sold more power at higher prices. However, there's about a $4 million delta in there that is explained partially because during that flooding event, we had all of our peaker units on. And so we had to buy more fuel than we had ever anticipated to buy during the month of March. That's exactly what those units are there for. So that explains some of that delta, just the fuel that we purchased. And also we had to bring down Nebraska City 2 for a number of days, which meant we had to purchase more power than what we had originally planned for. So that explains some of that variation where we had to our fuel and purchase power expense was higher than expected. Other expenses in March were $32.7 million, which is $100,000 under budget. Again, very, very close. We're tracking to budgets. All of these results in a net income for the month of March of a loss of $200,000, which is $500,000 over budget. We're better. We ended the year better than what we budgeted for. Year to date, net income, we are at $2.8 million, which is $2.5 million over budget. We are ahead of budget this year, and again, this is partially a result of January and February. We got positive months, and March wasn't that bad of a month despite the flooding event. Capital expenditures for March, this is where we did suffer because of the flood. Our capital expenditures are lagging. In the month of March, we're $16.3 million, which is $4.5 million under budget. We had a lot of our workforce diverted to flooding events, and the capital construction suffered as a consequence of that. It was a combination of our workforce and also the land and the conditions for building were not prime, so we had to delay some of those projects. Unrestricted cash balance at the end of March was $428 million, which is $10 million over budget. This continues a trend that we've experienced in January, February, certainly in March, of accumulation of cash as we go into the hot summer months of the year. And with that, I end my report. Any questions?
Thank you very much. Is there anything else, Mr. Gay? Well,
So related to the flood impacts at Nebraska City, do we submit to FEMA or other reimbursement programs? Do we have an idea of either the total cost of the outage that we experienced and what we might be seeing back eventually, or what's the timeline? Are we going to see a report about that eventually, or?
You will get a report, yes.
Okay. And so we don't yet have any kind of preliminary numbers of total impacts that we've had from?
I have a lot of those, but I'm not
Okay.
comfortable sharing them right now. It's too preliminary.
Yep, great, thanks.
Javier, most of the fuel cost during the outage was in natural gas, correct? You said additional fuel costs.
Correct.
And that would-
Additional over what we had budgeted, it's
for
natural
the-
gas.
For the peakers would be natural gas.
Most of them natural gas. We did ended up fueling 2 of our diesel units just in case. I don't think we ended up running them that much, but that accounts for a little bit of that. I shouldn't say all natural gas, but some of that diesel.
Majority.
Yeah.
Thank you.
questions?
And we have an access to credit markets report, which is very good. If you get to walk us through that one.
Yep. I'm going to walk you through that, and I'm going to stand over here. Okay, so This month, we get to review this is the monitoring report for Strategic Directive 3. This is the access to credit markets. I'm going to walk you through these relatively quick. The presentation really hasn't changed that much from the previous year. Just as a reminder, what we're trying to do here is in order to achieve a low cost and flexible cost structure, we need to maintain financial ratios and targets that ensure efficient cost and effective access to the credit markets. This is typically a non-issue until it is one, right? This is when you have a financial crisis like 2007, 2008, when having a good financial health meant a huge difference between having access to markets and not having that access. There are three things that we are tasked with providing some demonstration, and that is that our annual budgets are established around the concept of a debt service coverage of 2.0 times coverage, and I've talked about these recently with the new board members. I believe the rest of the board, we've talked about the 2.0 times coverage ratio. Also, the second part is when we make resource decisions, we take into consideration long-term revenue requirements and all the financial metrics that you see in front of you. This was evidenced by in October, November, December, when we present the corporate operating plan. In that plan, we demonstrate that everything built on that plan is around debt service coverage ratios, liquidity ratios, and debt to equity ratios. And the last one, obviously, it's to maintain a credit rating of a AA from Standard & Poor's, AA2 in this case for Moody's, with rating agencies that are consistent with those expectations. So with that really quick, this shows the historic debt service coverage and the expected debt service coverage ratio for the 2019 COP. I would say this is probably the most important ratio that we use to build our budget, our corporate operating plan. And so it is not by accident that these numbers are 2.0 times. That's how we build our COP. In 2017 and 2018, those numbers look suspiciously round, 2.00. Well, that was by design. Those 2 years, our coverage was higher than the 2.0. In fact, in 2018, it would have been 2.33 times above our debt service coverage. So what we ended up doing is that's what allowed us to transfer certain funds into the decommissioning and benefits reserve account, lowering the debt service coverage to the 2 times that we have established for ourselves. And you can see that for the most part, every year we've hit that. There was in 2015, we were just shy of that 2 times debt service coverage. That is, by the way, that is an OPPD self-imposed metric. Our legal obligation with bondholders is for our senior debt is to have these to be 1.4 times debt service, which is really, really important for our debt holders. We hold ourselves to a little bit higher standard for financial flexibility and financial health. As I mentioned, when we make resource decisions on the corporate operating plan, we take into account a lot of things, a lot of financial metrics, looking certainly at competitive position in establishing rates, maintaining our no general rate increase commitment, maintaining a commitment to operational requirements, SAIDs, and equipment availability factors, all of the things that have to be in place when we put our budget together. This is a pictorial of how that financial stability, we're balancing between operating expenses, capital funding, and rates. And so making sure that we're investing enough on maintenance, investing enough on our capital plan, but at the same time not breaking the bank and not blowing rates out of what we have established. These tells us, so part of the equation, one of the ways that we measure that equation is, are we taking on too much debt? Are we paying debt faster than we should or slower than we should? This debt to equity ratio really shows that our debt to equity ratio has been pretty low. For 2017, the debt to equity ratio median for public power entities of our size was 61%. So we were just higher than that median. I would like to point out that the reason we went from 51% in 2015 to 66% in 2016 was not because we issued any more debt, was because the board made the decision to decommission the Fort Calhoun nuclear station. That decision rendered that facility not a utility, a net utility asset, and therefore it was extracted out of that equation. So artificially, the ratio went up. Yes.
So the debt to equity ratio, when you say 61% is the median for utilities of our size?
In 2017.
In 2017. So how big is the universe on that? Is that
This is the top 50 utilities, public power entities that own generation.
50 public power?
Top 50.
Top 50?
Correct.
Okay. And by top, you mean?
Largest.
Largest. Okay. And is it a different debt to equity ratio for investor-owned utilities? I know it varies from sector to sector, right?
It is slightly different, but not too much. My understanding it's in the 50% range. Investor utilities are regulated by the public utilities commissions. They are the ones who tell them you cannot issue that much more debt. They're about in the 50% ratio.
Yep, thank you.
That ratio has continued to improve as time goes by. We have not issued any net new debt. We do have debt issuances from time to time, but on average, our debt portfolio has not grown. It has continued to shrink, and we have also lowered the interest rate on the overall portfolio. As we pay off our debt and we add capital, our ratio continues to drop back down to the low 50s. I'm expecting that to happen in 2022, 2023, for us to be back in that low 50% ratio. Yes.
So is there a target that we're going down to? You mentioned 61% as the median. I mean, this is not a specific metric in SD3, but do we have an idea of where we want to get? Is there a expected range of this is healthy to have X percentage ratio?
No.
Or?
We don't have a target. It's certainly a metric. It's a metric that tells you how much of your revenue is going down to pay interest expense.
Right.
Right, and so the lower the ratio, the lower interest expense you're paying, and the more flexibility you have. We don't know what the future holds, and I know we've been having lots of discussions on strategic directives and strategic initiatives, all the things that we all want to do. Some of those things are going to be very large and very expensive. There may come a time in OPPD's future where we may have to issue debt to finance large investments. Having a lower debt to asset ratio will allow us that flexibility to take on additional debt when needed to that. I know there are certain utilities, so some of our peers, large public power council members who have that ratio down in the mid-30s, right? So would I like for us to be down in the 30%? Yes, it would be very expensive. So it's a trade-off between how fast can you do this without necessarily breaking the bank on rates for our customers. I believe that this is putting us in a really good place for us to potentially take on additional debt when the time comes. But no, we do not have a target per se.
Yeah, our conversation with the board historically has been as we went from 51% to 66% was over a period of time to bring that back down to that 50% level. I mean, even though it's not a target, a goal, it was the concept of our plan is to bring it back down to that level and maintain that historical flexibility that we've had.
Right.
And what's the maximum that we would ever go up to?
That is entirely up to the board.
That's up to us. That's up to us.
Hopefully not 100.
Yeah, better not be 100.
So there are some that aren't too far away from us in the Midwest here that are more 75-25 or 80-20 that, create, I would say, capital constraints on how do you transition and transform if you don't have that financial flexibility. And so for us, in how we've looked at it very conservatively, if we can kind of move down to that 50-50 range, I think we preserve a lot of flexibility for us to think about what that transformation looks like.
Right. Let me make a note too that credit ratings are not formulaic. We don't just put in ratios and outcomes. An outcome, there's an analysis done, and having a high debt to equity ratio, certainly it's not positive from the rating agency's perspective, but there's no specific number that automatically would trigger any downgrade or upgrade. It's a combination of factors. Some of it is management, some of it is the board, liquidity, and many other factors. So that's why we don't take that specific goal or target of a debt to equity ratio. It's a combination of other factors.
So how much would the rating agencies factor that in? I think it'd be a big factor. I mean, you're saying, is that what you just said? That the rating agencies look at this, but it's not the one and only?
No, but it is certainly an important one.
Yeah.
Rating agencies are looking at our probability of default, right? And the more debt you have and the fewer assets you have to back that debt, that puts you in a more precarious condition than if you had the opposite. So it is certainly an important factor, but not the only factor.
Yeah,
To your point, though, Javier, that we have been having conversations about change and how do you finance change. And to Tim's point about this gives us flexibility when we have the 50%. If it gives us flexibility to do the investment that will actually move that up higher as we pursue the change, correct?
correct.
Potentially. Yeah.
Potentially, yeah. It depends on what you want to do with rates,
And among other things.
among other things, yeah.
Yeah.
It's a balancing act. Historically, the board has always liked to be around that 50 percentile range. We've always been comfortable. I think my other two older directors would agree with that. We've always been very comfortable with that.
See, the balance for us is,
And it is a
the
balance.
more you increase that debt to equity ratio, the greater the pressure is on your debt rating. And if that debt rating moves from AA to something else, you increase the interest and expense, therefore
It's a vicious
impact
cycle.
rates even more. So it is an interesting cycle that you have to just pay attention to.
And to Tim, Director Gay's point, I mean, that's not the only factor, though.
Absolutely, but it's a strong factor. I think when we went to the rating agencies and had the conversation about the decision around Fort Calhoun, and we showed them the historical, here's what we look like, and we're following the commitment that we made to them very clearly, that we are going to bring that
Bring it
down closer to that 50-50 range, and have the capability to be able to do that to them. That was incredibly powerful to them. That one, we made a decision, certainly created some pressure on debt equity, but we showed them a path that how we plan on getting back down to that debt equity ratio that is more representative of AA, strong rated, and there's only a few of us that are in that range today that have that strong financial position. And to the rating agencies, this is pretty positive, as well as the board's willingness and the ability to increase rates, our ability to execute on the plans that we say we're going to execute on. So it's a variety of different, the management capability, they review that. Do you have the management team that has the capacity and capability to deliver the results you say you're going to deliver? And so when we put together a corporate operating plan and we share it with them at the end of the year, they get to see that we're delivering on what we said we're going to deliver, and it just increases the confidence of the rating agencies. That's good for us as we go and ask for credit ratings for additional bonding capability.
So on this, well, debt, it's easy to get into, sort of, I mean, as we pay it down, that goes down. But if we had to go do something, big project, you can easily add to it, like all debt.
Absolutely.
It's easy to get
Exactly.
into and hard to get out of. So, I mean, I think we're doing a good job of getting that trend down, but if you look, it's just a couple percent, that takes work to get down back to that 50% ratio. So I just throw that out there as we plan ahead too.
Absolutely.
That is correct.
Be
And I would like to
cautious.
point out something that Tim mentioned quickly, and I think it is really, really important. Probably one of the most important factors that rating agencies take a look at is the combination between low rates. You want to make sure that you're competitive in the market and that you have low rates, but also with a very healthy commitment from the board to raise rates when you have to. This is one exercise that I have been, and my team and I, we've been engaging with the rating agencies for the past 3 years. When we haven't had a rate increase, we have to demonstrate that we're doing this in a good way. We're not having rate increases, but we're also not diluting our financial position. So we have to show them that. We have to show them that the fact that the board is not raising rates, hasn't raised rates for the past 3 years, it's not a bad thing. We're not eroding our financial health. But it's an interesting
It's
dichotomy.
interesting when I, as a director, have visited, the financial Moody's and whatever, they've asked me directly, okay, you haven't raised rates. How willing are you to raise rates if necessary? They actually ask you that question and everything.
Right.
The other thing, in '66, I remember when we got the report from the rating agencies, they had a very robust discussion about closing down Port Calhoun. Even though the debt equity ratio was 66%, they kept our AA rating because they believed in us that, this was a good decision to make in the end, and that it will go down.
There was a story to tell behind it.
It was a great story to tell. If you just look at the numbers, you go, oh my gosh, but no, they listened to the story, they believed us, and they believed in us, and they kept our rating.
Right. Okay. Moving on, days liquidity is another metric. How many days cash we have. If we stop receiving any payments, how many days would we be able to operate? We are now standing at about, at the end of 2018, 238 days. We're planning for this to go up to 251 days in 2019. The median in 2017 for the top 50, the largest 50 public power entities in the nation, was 258 days. So we are getting closer to that median, certainly trending in the right direction. This is one where having too much cash is also bad, right? I'm very aware that every dollar that we have in our reserves is $1 less that the community has. So we're very careful about not having too much cash on hand, but certainly enough cash to help us manage the utility in a prudent manner.
If we consider line of credit in these numbers, that it's currently excluded, how many days of operation?
At another 25 days, and all the metrics would go up to. I'm comparing apples to apples.
Sure.
The other one is competitive position, retail rates. I want to point out that in this table you will see national, not only regional. Our strategic directive 2 on rates asks us to compare us to regional averages, and we will do that in a couple months. I think in the next month, I think. From this perspective, rating agencies look at us not only from a regional perspective, but they're also looking at national. So here you have the average rates for national, regional, and you can see OPPD rates. OPPD rates, we were able to report that 2018, our overall rate, this is all of our revenue divided by the kilowatt hours we sold, turned out to be 8.9 cents per kilowatt hour. Went down from last year. Again, rates, you did not change rates. It's just a formula of how many kilowatts we sold and how much revenue we generated. We don't have statistics for 2018, but comparing to 2017, we were 14.9% below the national average and 8.7% below the regional average. Certainly showing our commitment to be under the national and the regional average, and this is something that's viewed positively by rating agencies as well.
Do these national, regional, and OPPD cents per kilowatt hour include any fixed fees, or are those excluded?
It is the entire revenue
The entire revenue?
and kilowatt hours.
So,
correct.
okay.
It includes
It
all
includes service
revenues,
charge too.
all revenues from customers.
Regardless of whether the revenue was volumetric or demand charge, or it's blind to that. It just takes all the revenues and kilowatt hours. That's the way. That is the best way for all utilities to be compared against each other.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
So, I'm sorry, I apologize. So that would include off-system sales as revenues as well?
No, it's just retail
Just
sales.
retail.
Correct.
Thank you.
Residential, commercial, industrial. And for each class, we have an average. This is the average for all of our classes. Credit rating, this is important. At the end of the day, this is one of the things that we're pursuing. We want to make sure that not only we think that we're credit worthy, but we have external third-party, nationally recognized agencies, in this case Moody's Investor Service and Standard & Poor's, have consistently rated us at a AA2 and AA respectively. And we just received their report, well, their latest rating affirmation from Moody's on March 19th, from Standard & Poor's on April 1st. It was not an April Fool's, it was a real report. And they confirmed our ratings for our senior lien debt at those levels. So with that, we share this report with the finance community via email, and the recommendation that we would like for you to entertain on Thursday is for you to recommend that the board find OPPD to be sufficiently in compliance with board policy SZ3. And with that, I conclude my report.
Thanks, Javier. So, anyway, on the finance committee, I apologize, we haven't had a meeting, but I've sent out a April 22nd meeting, and I know that doesn't work so today, I'll circle around, get a date, and then I'll try to get a more permanent date. I've just been swamped with some work requirements. So we'll get that and then get a permanent date. As we get into rates discussion and some of that, it's important we meet. And then we've got a few different ideas we've run by to maybe make our reporting a little bit more fine-tuned. So anyway, today, we'll get that done during a break or something. So Mo, I'm catching you off guard on that, but anyway. But anyway, thanks, Javier, for doing that. So that's all we have.
Okay. If there are no other questions with that, we can go on to systems management, nuclear oversight. Mr. Yoder.
Thank you, Director McGuire. We had a meeting on March 29th, and in keeping with the spirit of trying to move most of the discussion to the committee as a whole, we spoke mostly about the action items, the reporting items. There was one that was not discussed, so we'll move quickly, I guess, into those action items. The first one, one other thing. Some of the members of the Systems Committee and Director McGuire, I think, took a trip out to NC1, is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah, and so
And the entire campus.
And the entire, well, that's right.
The flooded campus, yes.
So it's a unique time, so I encourage all the other board members who have the opportunity to take that opportunity and go down there and see what's going on.
I think especially since NC1, it's the perfect time to see the scope of the work. It's very, very important. And then to see at the same time how the whole station down there handled the flooding. And it was really a major, courageous thing as far as not only the station, but the entire company came in together and everything. And I think, Mary, you had a great example as far as when all of a sudden you needed sandbagging, because it really was almost like a flash flood. This is not like the flood of 2011 when we knew it was coming. This was like a flash flood, and it was, the river was, rising an inch an hour, far more than they had ever expected. So, Mary, can you explain how, as far as all the stations helped, and also Troy can maybe pitch in there too, because they were saving the substation down there.
Thank you, McGuire. It was an extremely rewarding situation for the company, I believe. The company did come together, not just substations. Substations was down there overnight, ensuring that the substation was protected while the plant personnel were out, ensuring that the river did not overflow in certain areas to give them time to build a berm around the substation. Sandbags, if you go up to that facility, you'll see a tremendous amount of sandbags. That was just at one station. Fort Calhoun did the same thing. And the company really came together extremely well. It wasn't just those people that were out putting the sandbags together, but it was all of the support that we had from all of the divisions across the business unit. Supply chain, I can't say enough about them getting us the sandbags and the equipment that we needed, and right on target with that. The business continuity plan that the company put together worked extremely well. We have a lot of lessons learned. We'll do it better next time. But it was extremely rewarding to see the company come together and to work so efficiently and effectively as a unit.
Yeah, I thought the particular thing about getting the sandbags from Fort Calhoun, okay, if you can tell that story.
Fort Calhoun had been through several days of putting their own sandbags in, and really they, at one point in time, had almost 3 feet of water at the facility. Dealing with that, the crews were coming in by boat, and so extremely difficult to get in and out of that facility. I happened to mention one night that once they were done, and the flood was starting to recede at this point in time, that Nebraska City still needed sandbags. And I got up the next morning and they reported that they had done 88 pallets. Each pallet contains 60 sandbags overnight, and they needed 7 semi-trucks to make sure that they could get them transferred down to Nebraska City. So truly a corporate effort to get that done.
Actually, right here,
Yeah,
right now
every-
you
look at
see
you,
us
everything.
all very organized.
Yeah.
It was the
Everybody's-
same room that was our command center. And so for 9 days, we had tables and phones and
Yeah.
screens and TVs, and everyone was
Yes, I
very
understand the school
coordinated,
business.
organized, and we had conference calls frequently. And so this was a command center really trying to coordinate all the work that happened across the district.
24/7.
Yeah.
24/7, and it's interesting just a few
Yeah.
weeks later that we're sitting here in the same room.
Yeah,
just talking
because you
about it.
had, Lisa's team was reaching out and telling you, Julie's team was working very, very hard. I think Fanslaw's over there. He didn't get much sleep either. Nobody got any sleep.
Thursday, during the president's report, you'll be seeing a great video that the team put together,
Yeah.
just the behind the scenes of how we kept the power on.
Cool.
And this is also, the only other thing that I thought was amazing is that the employees down there are 9 employees down there in Nebraska City that are coming to work, and their commute times have increased to like to 2.5 hours sometimes and everything, and trying to find places for them to stay and everything, and it's been a struggle for these employees. You know, there's a lot of people who haven't got much sleep down there.
And it's not
Things are
just down
living.
there, I know that you were down there, but we have that across the system.
It's everywhere.
It
Yeah.
is everywhere.
There's a lot of
We
employees
have
who can't get to
People in
work.
T&D, so we have a lot of people that have been displaced. Our employees have really come to the aid of OPPD.
One thing I was impressed with is just seeing the teamwork there. Not just across our organization, but one thing Mary mentioned is that the contractors didn't bail when they stayed around because, I mean, I think that speaks to our culture, is that our contractors didn't just, leave and say, well, call us when you're done. They actually stayed around and worked with our folks, and as soon as we were ready for them to come back to work, they came back to work. And I think that speaks to the culture,
And-
that we work as a team within the organization, but that others outside the organization see us as a team member as well. So I thought that was
And that
important.
was just at Nebraska City. I will say at Fort Calhoun, the contractors actually pitched in and helped us put the sandbags out, helped us fill the berms, helped run crews to make sure that we could get the berms up and to protect the facility. So it was really, truly a company-wide effort, and it was just really rewarding to see everybody come together.
Is this the time to also talk about possible future flooding?
I don't know.
Good news, bad news?
The river is rising again, I think is what Director McGuire is
Yes, near
referring to. They are anticipating to be another 3 or 4 feet coming up. We're watching it carefully. We have left all of the berms in place, anticipating that there might be another wave, and we're watching it carefully at this point.
Yeah.
On that flood, on future flooding though, I mean, it's a great job by everyone doing all this, but protections, Eric, you'd probably know more about this than all of us, but on future floods, there could be worse, quite honestly. Are we doing anything that could protect us so we don't have to, like a permanent protection?
So one
Yeah.
of the conversations that we're having is, we were in 2011 in a 500-year flood, and here we find ourselves 8 years later in another 500 flood scenario, 500-year flood. And so the conversation we're having is that, what are those sustaining measures we need to put in place? And so there's probably a list that we are all gathering to be able to do that. But this is the conversation that we're having, is that we just need to put in firm, long-term, sustainable measures to make sure that we can protect not only our generating assets, our transmission assets, people assets, kind of as we move forward. And so you'll see those at a later point in time. A matter of fact, as we get to the corporate operating plan and for 2020, if there are some that are specifically identified for that, we'll try to identify those specifically for long-term sustainable strategies for flood mitigation or prevention, so.
If I may, thank you, by the way. I very much enjoy the continued excellence shown by operations and systems. Certainly is a wonderful time to reflect on that, and thank you for your preparation. One bit of information, Tim, I'm easily confused by this as well. 500-year flood is kind of a strange term. Every year you have a 0.02% chance. It's a probability term. So every year you have that same probability.
Sure.
So to say it's twice versus every 500 years is a bit of a
We understand.
misunderstanding.
Yeah.
Well, but we have people listening in.
Yeah.
So I just want to make sure that we understand that. And I do appreciate that we're looking at future resiliency, because floods will happen. So again, thank you. Wonderful response, wonderful, excellent performance, and we all are proud and happy to see it. So on to the action items. Vice President Comstock, could you talk to us a little bit about the railroad easement acquisition? This is something we do every year, isn't that correct?
Thank you, Director. This is an action item that we bring every year, and it is to authorize us to use eminent domain if we cannot come to negotiations with railroads where we need to cross their crossings, either over or under them. For our electrical system, it's typically for distribution lines that we're doing this, but there's two ways that we could come to eminent domain. For our larger railroads in Nebraska, we have master agreements that outline how we're gonna go about this process of getting an easement to put our lines through. So if they're not following the agreement as laid out, then we may come to use eminent domain. The other is for smaller railroads that are within our service territory where we need to go over or under them. And again, we first attempt to negotiate, and if we're not able to negotiate, then we would use eminent domain. We put this out here every year. It's for emergent type projects, not we don't have any specifically for 2019 at this point, but if we have any that arise, then we would potentially have to go down this path.
Have we always had to separate the railroad easements from the general private property easements as far as the
Yeah, we have.
authorization?
Just historically, it's just unique with railroads, their process to get approvals. Really, we need this because the process for approvals can be long if you don't have this, and that's why we put this in place. This is for distribution, not just transmission, but it's for distribution or for underground service. It's for all easements that we would need.
Hold on, don't we do this every year, is this for our benefit that you're telling us you're doing this, or don't we have legal authority to do this anyway? Why do we have to come every year and do this?
We do have legal authority to do that. We ask the board for permission on that legal authority. So the way we have historically done it is that if we come with a project that's going to require right-of-way easements, we would ask the board to give us that right to condemn in the event that we need to condemn property for that easement or for that project. Some companies do it kind of like this, broadly, to give them the right to be able to do that. Or if you approve the corporate operating plan and a project in there requires easements, that constitutes the approval to be able to do that. We've been a little more transparent about it, and on specific projects have the board give us the approval to do that.
Yeah, so it's a transparency.
It's a transparency issue.
Because, I mean, it's not like we're not gonna do this, I would assume. And then you've been very good, anytime we've had to even come close to this, of telling us why we're doing it, what we're doing it, so we don't use it liberally, let's put it that way.
Correct.
I just had the question, because I know
Yeah.
we have the authority to do this anyway,
You
but
bet.
this is for our benefit. All right, thanks.
So I have a follow-up question that's brought up a little bit by the flooding and the unusual situations that we have here. Do we, would this Would there ever be a temporary easement that would be sought under this? Is there an eminent
Yes.
domain temporary easement?
So these are
Construct?
for permanent easements.
Yeah, okay,
And
all right.
I guess if Mark Cole, who has our land rights, if he wants to come up and speak to when there might be a temporary type easement.
Because in my travel, I've seen railroads washed out. So
Several.
I'm wondering if there's something going on right now.
As Julie introduced, my name is Mark Cole. I'm a supervisor of our land management, transmission siting and records group. Great question, Director Yoder. There are times when we have to acquire temporary easements or temporary railroad crossings. What this action item is specifically calling out is for the permanent rights that we're requesting. So depending on any given set of circumstances, flooding or otherwise related, there may be times where we have to ask for something temporary in nature and negotiate to that. But specifically for this, we're looking for permanent crossings for railroads.
The purpose is to acquire temporary and permanent easements, if needed, right?
It
But
says temporary
we've said
here.
it's just only permanent in this case, is that right?
It does say temporary, yeah.
So
Yeah,
make
it
sure I
says
understand.
temporary too,
We
yeah.
typically ask for both,
Yes.
Okay.
but Mark is absolutely right. I can't remember a situation where we've asked for a temporary
Yeah.
on a railroad crossing, probably wouldn't.
Right.
It's just best to be prepared
Yeah,
to
yeah.
ask for either one.
Yeah,
Okay,
she's got it in there
just
too.
want to make sure I
Okay.
understood.
Thank you for that.
Is it getting harder to get these rights with the anti-government kind of state we're in? Is it getting harder are people pushing back more? No, I mean, seriously.
Good
Yeah.
point, yeah, good point.
Because this has been an issue in the legislature, I know. But is it harder to do, or
I don't know
don't
that
you want to
it's
answer that
harder.
question?
Some people may approach it as an opportunity to try and get more money out of their land than
Yeah,
maybe
which
what
I don't
the
blame them.
appraised value
And the
would
appraised
be.
value, yeah.
So it becomes negotiations.
Well, yeah, so
situation.
one question specific to railroad crossings. Mrs. Comstock identified this at the beginning. We have negotiated master agreements with the two largest railroads, which are the railroads that we most frequently cross. And so the majority of the time we are utilizing those master agreements and we don't have any issues associated with it. This board action item is in the event that we couldn't or chose not to utilize that master agreement, or the railroads that are smaller in nature that we don't have those master agreements in place with. Your question specific to easements in general, right? There are times when it is more difficult. There are times, every project has its own unique set of circumstances.
I don't think that, I think the feeling is that it's more difficult, certainly. That's probably why you asked the question, Director Gay. So, but I don't know that the numbers really bear that out so much. We've, and I think, Steve Fanslaw or Mark Pohl, could probably provide those numbers, not necessarily today, but if we were to look back in our records over a period of time, it maybe has gone up a little bit in terms of the number of condemnation proceedings we have on large projects, but not markedly, I would say. It just feels that way.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Nothing else on the easements. DPVI, we've got a couple of action items related to the continued growth in Sarpy County.
Yes, back again. And this particular item is for a labor contract for electrical equipment at the Sarpy County substation that we've discussed. And it's to erect and assemble equipment. That kind of work focuses on steel supports, insulators, breakers, switches, metering equipment, wiring, which we have a nice little picture of up there for you to see. The reason we need to have outside support is our workforce is fully prescribed for 2019. This is an additional large project that's in play. And so to meet the timeframes that we need for the growth in the area, we're looking for outside help with this. Construction will begin in May and end in November of this year. 3 proposals were received. All 3 were legally responsive. However, only 2 were technically responsive. All three were pretty close in price and near the engineer's estimate of $2 million. Unfortunately, we had Ellie Myers that took several exceptions during the technical, including technical welding certifications and testing specifications, which on its own merit is a pretty big deal. They also did not provide a firm price on clay, and they added a clause for per diem exception so that per diem cost per employee could float, adding uncertainty to the cost of the overall contract. So with those considerations in place and the fact that we had two others that didn't go through that, Integrated Power Company had no exceptions in this process and were evaluated to be the best and lowest bid. We've not used them before. It's a new company for us, so because of that, we went out and we checked some references that they had, some of which were utilities. And so we feel pretty good about the feedback that we received from those others that it's a good company. And we're always excited to have an additional player in the game. You know, competition's good, so it helps us, you know, with our overall costs in the long run. And so what we're looking here is for request to award the labor contract to Integrated Power Company for a little over $2.3 million based on the evaluation of the RFP.
Since they are, this is the first time, do we add any additional supervisory, supervision with them, just to make sure they're doing it the right way?
Yeah, our folks will be on site. There's a lot of work taking place at the substation. There's contractors on and off site, so yeah, I don't know that it's any more than normal.
But will we have one person sort of looking in on them?
There's several.
Or several?
So yes, as
Okay.
our folks float in and out on the site, they like to keep track of the work that's going on, especially since they'll maintain it later. So there's more than one set of eyes that are on the work being performed.
Okay.
Other questions on this one? Thank you. We have a second action item.
Yes. So this next one is, it's a fancy ACSS conductor, which is just wire. So if anybody wants to see it, here it is. We'll pass it around.
Describe it a little bit?
Sure.
What's going on there?
It has a steel center for support, and then it has aluminum that's wrapped around it that actually carries the conductor. As I pass it around, do be careful, the ends can be a little sharp where they've been cut. And so from a safety standpoint, we wouldn't want any injuries.
And there's no further coating. That's how it is out in the field.
That is exactly right. Looking back at the safety guy there. So AC,
Conductor, can you
it's
explain?
the wire that carries the electricity. So if you look up.
That's
and
just all it is just the wire.
Just the wire.
It's a big wire.
And so it's called ACSS, which stands for Aluminum Conductor Steel Supported. So the steel's in the middle. This supports aluminum conductor that we see around it. Line construction will begin in June for this project, in December. However, the wire's not needed till about the July period. During that month or so, there's a lot of additional work that takes place to actually put foundations in place, framing, and so forth. So the wire's not needed till July. 3 proposals were received. This one's interesting, as all 3 were technically responsive. However, none of them were legally responsive, which was, the evaluation was performed by Fraser Stryker on that. And so what happened is the companies, 2 of them substituted some old terms and conditions that we had with them on past business practices. The third provided some that we hadn't seen before. And so when we go out for an RFP, we have particular terms and conditions that we have in place. And so when you have entities come back and wanting to change those or use old ones, then that throws them out from being legally responsive. It isn't frequent to see all 3.
Maybe never.
Yeah, maybe never. All 3 go down this path. Now, some of them we've had some very recent dealings with, so I'm wondering if they just, instead of reviewing the new T's and C's, tried to lean on the old ones in place. All 3 were a little higher than an engineer's estimate, which was mainly due to the cost of aluminum, but they were still ballpark pretty close. Our supply chain and engineering groups are confident that if given the opportunity, we would be able to negotiate those Ts and Cs pretty readily. We wouldn't think it would take too much effort to be able to do that. So what we're asking for the board in this case is authorization to reject all three proposals and for district management to enter into a negotiated contract with one of these entities. And Southwire was clearly the lowest price, and we've used them before, so that would be our starting point, is to start those negotiations with Southwire.
This doesn't require an engineer certificate, so this doesn't require a supermajority? Is that?
It does not require supermajority.
Okay.
The statutes under which OPPD operates on sealed bid contracts allows just this type of action by the board when all proposals are non-responsive, either legally non-responsive or they're over fair market value. So it's a flexible statute and very helpful in this kind of rare situation, actually.
Great, thank you.
And this negotiation would not delay that July 5th delivery?
We don't believe so, no.
Okay.
In fact, I don't know that the extent of the discussion will take a long time, considering we've had previous dealings with this entity before.
You're really just cutting down the Ts and Cs. The cost is, we're pretty comfortable with it. That doesn't seem to be a point of negotiation. The scope of work is clear, right? Like, that's what we're
technical.
assuming.
Yeah, I mean, Ts and Cs are the main focus, but
Yeah.
you know, as you walk through those,
Once you
sometimes
put
you have the
stuff on.
It's
ability
pretty
to
important.
tighten things up a little bit in the contract, so,
Mhm.
yeah.
And the reason to do this, to give you approval to direct negotiate rather than rebid it, is the timing issue, I would assume,
That's
right?
correct.
Okay.
Thank you, VP Rod. Is there other questions? And all three of the action items will be on the consent agenda, is that right? Yep, okay, very good. And so we'll be looking for approval on the consent agenda. So thank you. VP Fisher, time for a nuclear oversight report.
Thank you. I'd like to report that we continue with our dry cask project. It's continuing currently as expected. I think that the production rate, I think the last time we had discussion about this, we were still having issues with that. I think we've come up with some recovery plans and believe now that this is on track. We continue to monitor that, and we'll do so very closely as we move forward. Also, just over the last month, just back to the flooding, a lot of the activities got shifted over to flooding and ensuring the safety of the workforce and the equipment up there. So that took a lot of time over the month. I might mention at that point that there was a question that came in from Director Mulhoff about, are any of our landfills affected by the flooding, and I'm glad to say that no, none of our landfills were affected by the flooding. I know that's been out in the news and people have been asking about that. We're very careful about making sure that we monitor our landfills and that we take care of those. I will say that at our Nebraska City station, one of the landfills had a discharge piping that got damaged, and it was replaced and repaired pretty quickly to make sure that we continue to have a proper drainage. Again, our landfills are intact, and really we have no issues with them at this point in time.
So a follow-up on that is, appreciate that there's no flooding disturbance of the landfill, but doesn't the water table then come up and see more flow there?
Well, it can, yes, and so that's why we do the monitoring that we have around those. We pay particular attention to them.
So no deterioration, but some more flow through there perhaps?
Yes, so we make sure that we continue with our monitoring and make sure that we are following and tracking what's going on with each one of those landfills, whether it be at Fort Calhoun, Nebraska City, or North Omaha stations. We track and monitor all of those.
Another great site visit if you'd ever want to see. I've toured the landfill site down there, and the supervisor in charge of the landfill, his name is?
I'm sorry?
The landfill, the person that I spoke to last time.
The one that actually helped construct it was John Wickman.
Yes, and he gives a great tour if you would ever want to see about the landfill.
He's our
and everything.
civil engineer.
He's our civil engineer, and he's also the one who's doing the 2.5-hour commute too, so.
And
Yeah, he lives in
so,
Iowa.
One thing Mr. Baker was explaining to me this morning is the landfill that was kind of in the high water area where there might have been some seepage, that's a line
Oh, so you're talking Nebraska City?
in Nebraska City.
That is at Nebraska City.
Certainly,
And,
yes.
and the historic landfill was not flooded. It was higher up, so that's additional protection there.
In fact, when you have a chance to come down and visit, you'll see that we've actually placed the berms from the edges of the landfill. The landfill is significantly higher than those berms.
I guess I was thinking of north of.
Oh, north of us. And north- the landfill.
Okay, thank you.
And then just to finish at the closed session, we'll be talking about the decommissioning contract and the status of that.
Thank you. Other questions? Yeah.
Today during closed session?
Yes.
All right, that concludes our report. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much. Next, we have public information.
Mr. Moody.
Legislative session.
All right. Today is day 56. But before we get started on that, yesterday was a really great day down in the legislature. We had Line Worker Appreciation Day. We took 5 of our line crews and leaders, and Troy and I and Lee O'Neill went down and met with the senators, and we had line workers from across the state. And what's really great about this is it really was a celebration of public power and how we all come together. And here's an interesting fact from OPPD The Wire, as you know, we've been covering that, is that we have in Nebraska 27,000 miles of power lines, enough to span from New York to Los Angeles 10 times. That's a lot of responsibility. And there was a lot of pride yesterday, and it was a great day. So go to OPPD The Wire and check out how we captured that with the senators. So with that, Mr. O'Brien, we're going to do a quick overview. There hasn't been a lot of change since the last time we reported out. And the PowerPoint legislative update is on the back side of the bill tracker. So next month, we'll make sure it's in front of the bill tracker in that regard. So, and I believe that's on page 33 in Diligent for you if you want to follow along.
Thank you.
Thanks, Lisa. Good morning, everybody.
Morning.
Look forward to providing an update for you. 2 things on the agenda, just a little reminder of where we are in the legislative process, so we'll touch base on that. And then we will walk through updates to bills that we've been tracking since our last report to the board in March. So that's what our agenda looks like. Lots of activity has been happening since our last time we got together. Seth Voiles and Tom Richards, I want to recognize them and the great work that they've been doing every day in Lincoln. Early mornings, late nights, they are keeping track of all things going on. Even yesterday, I tuned into something right before lunch on a bill about something that wasn't on kind of our radar list, and there was starting to creep to discussion on some things that are interesting to our business, and so they do a great job keeping a pulse on all of those things, so I wanted to make sure and recognize their work. We continue to update the board via director's update, so some of the things that you'll see me speak about you've seen in your director's update, but we'll give a little bit of time for discussion on those. As Lisa said, we are in day 56 of 90, and so towards the end of our legislative calendar, March was a wild month, and if you remember, I described it as it's kind of March Madness, and I like sports, and I think that's the right analogy for it. And so in March, that's the time where bills begin to move. We also start to see what bills get prioritized. So if you look on your bill tracker, you'll see a highlight in gray, and that means that a bill is prioritized. Each senator can prioritize a bill. The committees can prioritize up to 2 bills, and the Speaker of the Legislature can prioritize up to 25. And I did a quick count this morning. I think it's 107 bills that receive priority status out of 739. So now that that's happened, those bills are starting to be heard, kind of based in their priority status, and the Speaker of the Legislature sets the agenda. So that's a little bit about where we are through March. Just a little forecast on April. it's going to get really interesting. They've started full debate, as Lisa said, so they start in the morning at 9 and they go into the late afternoon. We also heard yesterday there will even be some days they'll start going to 8:30, which is kind of unique to start those longer days already because there's so much work to do. So a lot of things going on. In the middle of April, there'll be a lot of big topics that are going to come out, and so we're excited that some of the bills of interest to us are moving forward, and I'll speak to those shortly. But in the middle of April, the Revenue Committee will bring a variety of pieces forward from the state budget. The Forecasting Board also meets later in April. That affects the budget. Things on income tax, sales tax, how the state pays for some of the flooding items, property taxes, tax incentives, all those things will come to head in the middle of April. So a lot of activity will be happening then. That's a little bit of the calendar of where we've been since the last update and a little bit where we're headed in April. With that, I've got a couple slides on the priority bills that we have been really working very diligently on, and I'm going to provide a status of what's changed since we last got together in March. And you can see the full details in your bill tracker if you'd like to use that, or if you'd like to follow along with the slides, you could certainly do that. First bill, LB 16. This was a bill we supported, and we're excited that it was approved by the governor on March 21st. That was a great bill, a great collaboration from the industry, the electric utility industry on that particular bill. LB 155. We've talked a lot about this particular bill. It has to do with eminent domain and defining public use for the interconnection between renewable facilities. This bill was early prioritized by the senator that introduced it in February. And then in February, it was brought to the legislative floor, debated for nearly 3 hours, and then it failed to move forward based on the vote that occurred there. So there's a lot of options that can happen when a bill has that happen. Often it will carry over to next year, or the senator may choose to do something different, or they could be amended or attached to other bills moving forward, thus the keen eye that the team keeps happening in Lincoln. And then a unique thing happened in the middle of March in the priority time. Another senator prioritized the bill. I don't think Tom and I were talking, and Seth, we've never seen a bill prioritized again if it had been defeated in the first round of debate. So kind of an unheard of practice in the legislature, but there's always things that surprise us every year. So that's happened. What that means is there's a good chance the bill will be brought back to debate to the legislature. From our understanding, it will be later in the debate after many of the other bills have been discussed. We keep hearing of rumored amendments coming to attach to the bill. We've not seen any of those or frankly been engaged in those conversations. So that's a little bit where LB 155 is. LB 184, we've been neutral in this position. This is small cell wireless, or 5G, so the attachments to our infrastructure. We've worked on this bill for a couple years. Seth has really been the expert on this particular bill. It received committee priority status in March. We're not sure when it'll come up to be debated, but we are confident that there will be good discussion to move this particular bill forward. Yes. So you'll see that through a few of these. So one of the interesting parts of the legislative process is different senators have the opportunity to file amendments or have discussions on certain topics. And so this particular senator and others will attach amendments to bills that they want to have a discussion or bring attention to. So this particular senator provided several amendments to a variety of bills over the last couple weeks to either move them back to committee or indefinitely postpone them. So it's a tactic that happens in the legislature. A lot of the amendments that were posted kind of in that last week of March are being removed as well. So it's frankly a tactic to have debates and discussion on particular bills. So that's kind of how that works. Great question. Thank you. Director McGuire. LB 218, this is a bill we've supported. This was a bill really led by OPPD. If you remember, it has to do with the classification of our utility poles and infrastructure and how it's taxed or potentially taxed by the Department of Revenue. This bill has really been moving nicely. Javier testified on behalf of the bill. The Speaker of the Legislature provided a priority status for the bill. It was debated, took about 10 minutes for the debate. We were really pleased on how that went, and then moved forward to the next round. There's been a couple amendments attached to it, just for clarification, as we've been working with the Nebraska Power Association. A couple things their members brought up that we thought made sense to attach to the bill and provide some more clarity. We're understanding that the bill will hopefully be up this week, so it will be in its second round of debate, which is excellent. We have anticipation that that'll move forward nicely, and then it'll go into the last stage of debate or final reading. So Seth and Tom have been keenly focused in Lincoln on ensuring that bill comes up this week. The next bill is 283, and this, let's see. Yes, sorry, I was 283. This is really the action plan for climate change from a prior report that was built and prepared by the university. There has been no change since we last discussed this bill. It didn't receive priority from the committee, so it the next bill college proposed Power Review Board to look at the state for in this understand the with or the Nebraska Power Association priority status move anywhere. This slide supported this quality and slide here. Another was a it changes the way that funding can be used related to a couple of Department of Environmental Quality's funds. We think it could be helpful for some of the activities through the district through potential decommissioning or other activities at some of our plants. LB 373, this was a bill we opposed and provided a letter. This had to do with the zoning and other regulations for renewable energy projects. There's been no change since we last talked about this particular bill. Don't anticipate that it moves in a big way. And it also didn't receive a priority status. The next bill is 462. This has to do with one call. And I know we've had a few conversations about this particular bill. There was a lot of folks opposed to this bill, even the one call board at the hearing. And what was interesting with this one is the bill received priority status. The chair of the Transportation and Telecommunications Committee was the introducing senator. I think used that privilege to provide a priority status to that. So that means that this bill will be debated on the full legislative floor. We're hopeful the industry and others associated with one call activities can create some amendments or make the bill more workable. The next one is LB 509, and this is a discussion we've had a lot with the board on net metering and provisions to net metering. We supported the amendment, the amended version of this particular bill. The hearing was actually during the last board meeting with a lot of folks pro and con on this particular bill. What our understanding is that the bill didn't come out of the committee to be debated from the full legislature, that there will be some form of interim study. And there's different layers of how the interim study process works. I was looking at the rules last night, and so the senator likely, or the committee that introduced the bill, has until the 80th day of the legislature to put in for a study, and then they scope the study. I believe it's almost 30 days or so after the legislative session. So some of the studies can really be more of a hearing, so to speak, or some can be more in depth. And so we'll engage, and we'll let you know when we know more information on where the study process with this particular bill is headed. The next bill is LB 627. This has to do with discrimination. We talked about OPPD has some great policies already around the concepts in this bill. The bill has not moved forward since the last discussion that we have had in March. Two left on this sheet, and then there's another one I want to talk about. LB 678 has to do with the cash fund and the use of the Volkswagen dollars for electric charging stations. The hearing was on March 20th. It has not received priority status as well, so it's probably not much is going to happen with this particular bill. Yes, sir.
Are we going to continue to be involved in encouraging some action there, or do we have any I mean, if it's not a priority, what are our next steps there?
Yeah, great question. Overall, we're certainly engaged on the Volkswagen settlement and the work that DEQ is doing. There's a lot of folks from Julie's team and Russ, a lot of folks touch that. In terms of this bill, there really isn't a lot of movement or other angles where it could go. We're keeping a keen eye on it if there's an opportunity to do that.
Sure.
Yeah.
So you're involved from an NCA side on the broader kind of electric vehicle activity. You may want to just talk just a little bit about that.
And at the NCA board meeting, we talk a lot about this particular settlement and so forth. So the organization will stay engaged in those conversations and stay making sure that there's activity that's going along with this. So more to come in that regard.
And this settlement, the funds are over a 5-year period, so this bill could come up again next year, and we could still get the 15% for electric vehicle infrastructure next session.
Rather than the 10% that it's currently.
Rather than the 10%
Increase
that's
the money
currently.
available.
Because most states, when they got their settlement, went with the 15%, which was allowed. Nebraska went with 10. And this bill would be hoping to change that.
And I asked because APPA had a webinar last week about electric vehicle programs around the country, and Salt River Project and a much smaller utility, Elk River Municipal Utility, both talked about their existing programs for ratepayers for electric vehicle charging, as well as for employees, as a way to encourage familiarity with electric vehicles. And when you look at the fiscal note on this one, it talks about the cost, the expenditures, but it doesn't really talk about the benefits. And so average fuel costs per vehicle, something like $1,000 per year, and that's money that's leaving our local economy. But if you have an electric vehicle, you are reinvesting in your local public utility, something like $250 per year. So it's much cheaper for the driver, and it does have a financial benefit to the local public utilities. Again, something that was highlighted by the utilities who have strong programs now. So, I mean, from the financial breakdown, I think there's some information that's not being highlighted here about the benefits to the state. And I think we should keep engaged with that, because there are benefits to public utilities from allocating those funds directly into investing in locally produced resources through existing infrastructure, which is what electric vehicle charging can provide. And so increasing that funding from 10 to 15% would be a benefit to all of the utilities, and I'm sure NPA knows this. I'm disappointed that this has not moved forward, because it is such a benefit. It's money that's already available that will be spent somewhere, and this is one of the most impactful ways that it can redirect that money and have multiplier effect within the state of Nebraska to our public utilities. So I hope that we stay engaged in this with other utilities, and I do hope that we do see that increase from 10 to 15%, because it has such a strong benefit to us.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Director Williams. I appreciate the comments on that one. Two left, one on the sheet and then one I'll talk about. LB 720, this is the Imagine Nebraska Act. This is the update or new economic development tax incentive program. Since we printed off or sent the bill tracker to you on Friday, an amendment was filed to kind of clean up or provide some more technical changes to the bill. There's been a lot of momentum around this particular bill. It's really, I would say, vital to growth and development in the state of Nebraska. We wouldn't see some of the large projects that we're seeing come to the state or expand in the state. And so there's a lot of focus and discussion and education around incentives and how they work. And so there's been a lot of work from my team and Tim and Lisa and many around the table on this particular bill.
And Tim, this
Yes.
is a bill that, the Imagine, this replaces a program that expired, right? So this is not anything new, this is to replace one that expired.
Will expire.
That will expire, and so we don't want to see that fall off.
Correct. Yep, exactly right. Thank you. The last one that's not on your sheet, it's been on our monitoring list, is LB 700. And what this bill has to do with in requiring a decommissioning plan and other details with respect to renewable energy development, really specifically with wind. What was interesting on Friday also, late in the day, a amendment was filed. We had been anxious to see what would be included in that amendment. So a little bit of background on sort of the process from how these items are put in place. So with a renewable energy, with a wind project, there is an agreement between the landowner and the developer that sets the terms and process for constructing and developing the project on their property. There's also typically provisions in that agreement around decommissioning activities, so taking the tower off, the blades, etc., what that looks like. So there's a whole bunch of things in that agreement. What this bill is doing is requiring that there is an agreement that specifies a decommissioning process and that the land is returned back to its current state. And so what we were trying to understand is what is current state and what's included. So the amendment that was filed, as the team's continuing to review it, it specifies all the different pieces. One of the parts we wondered is the foundation. And so to remove the concrete and rebar and all those kinds of things and how far that goes down, this amendment clarifies really removing all of that. And there's quite a bit of concrete that's put in place for the foundation of the turbine. So they basically, I would say, Danny kind of helped educate us on this, but really a big pancake kind of amount of concrete, and then they build a pedestal on top of that and then put the turbine on from there. And a lot of processes in the agreements, it is to remove 4 feet below ground, and this is talking about removing all the different pieces and parts. We're hearing that it could add quite a bit more cost to the decommissioning portion of the renewable energy projects. So we're trying to get some better numbers of what is that impact, and we don't have all those calculations done yet. We're seeing that it is a fair increase on what potentially could be added. Yes, Director Williams.
I think in one of the previous meetings, I can't remember where that was, we talked about the depth of a concrete foundation for a wind turbine. If it's a few hundred feet in the air, it might be up to 60 feet deep. And so 4 feet removal of concrete near the surface is one version of decommissioning. But if there's a requirement to remove all of the concrete, is that part of the discussion? That would be removal of the entire foundation all the way down?
That is part of the amendment.
And I assume we're opposed to that?
Well, we're trying to get some better information. So this amendment just came out on Friday. And so the construction that we talked about last time was on our transmission structures, where we'll use a pier. And sorry, Danny, I'm getting into your space a little bit. Wind construction is a little bit different. They don't go down as far. They do kind of a bigger pancake pad and then put a pedestal on top. And so it may be a little easier for removal of that, but there is quite a bit of movement and such on the property to be able to get back down to that. And we're trying to understand, is that done everywhere? It's just something that we haven't become experts or followed on all of the different construction related to how wind turbines are constructed, so.
Do we know to what extent current agreements cover removal and decommissioning of these facilities?
Yeah, nearly, so the agreement between the landowner and the developer, they have decommissioning provisions. What we've found just from a quick scan of talking to some of the developers is most go 4 feet below grade on removing and then repairing and bringing the land back to current or better than found before the project happened. There's also some provisions on repowering the turbine as well in those landowner agreements. So there's a couple pieces in that the amendment clarifies in terms of timing and process for those.
Really, the big difference between what's current, typical today versus what the law would require is that anything below 4 feet difference. Is that the main difference between what the state is saying and what's actually happening today?
Yeah, so pretty close. I'll try and clarify just a little bit, and then push me if I'm not giving you what you're seeking. There is no, what this bill is attempting to do is put in place a requirement to ensure these specific items are in that landowner agreement. Today, there is no law that requires the specificity in which these items need to be put in place. And then, so today, it's kind of what's negotiated between the landowner and the developer.
Right.
Yeah.
There's no counties that have any specific laws or anything. I would think there are some counties that have some laws. Every county's got some kind of, there's county laws too. So would the state law supersede all the county laws if this was in effect? It probably would, correct?
Yeah, and the bill also talks about, to that point, Director McGuire, about other zoning provisions from political subdivisions as well. So it's another piece into the puzzle. Mm-hmm.
I think part of the concern from the utility perspective is this nexus to what about transmission structures very similar to easement structures and removing 60 feet of transmission structures that may be underground. What are the implications of that if you begin to kind of go underneath this kind of cover? How does this impact the utilities? Certainly, we certainly understand, at least talking to the developers, how that may increase their decommissioning costs by 30 to 50% or whatever that number may be. And so how does that impact future renewable projects? And then we're also looking at what about the nexus to utility infrastructure and utility foundations and the impact of that. And because some of these same kind of senators have the same kind of concerns, maybe on the utility side, that we just want to really understand the implications of that and make sure it doesn't automatically include transmission structures on the utility side for this. So we need to get more information, but we're paying a lot of attention to this one too.
And then the other way that affects us is that if the costs to the developer are higher, then the amount that we pay on our power purchase agreements are higher, and so that doesn't protect our customers to get low-cost energy.
Yeah, and so specific to removal of any footings or foundations that are deeper than 4 feet, I think that OPPD is in a unique position to provide some subject matter expert information to the senators, because I think there's some misnomer about there being a water quality issue with leaving that structure in place below that 4-foot level, so.
There's a couple pieces. I think that's one. The other piece is depending on where you may grow product in the state, in a drier climate, root systems are deeper, and the concern is that's impacting that. Now, these are not significant square footage areas. You know, these aren't multiple acres, I don't believe, right? So that's the conversation we want to have, is let's have that negotiation with the landowner, but let's make sure we get the right facts and the right information.
And our commitment to you is if we change that position, we will let you know and an overview of our position, so.
Thank you. Yes, Director Williams.
This is decommissioning mostly related to clean energy potential projects, but there are also other projects in the state, pipelines that have different decommissioning concerns. And are there similar requirements for very comprehensive decommissioning there? And I guess that's somewhat rhetorical. The point here is basically that as we look toward wanting to be a leader in a new energy economy, and we talk about separation between existing energy policies that have been in place for a long time and where Nebraska could be in the future with developing our own clean natural resources of wind and solar, we are putting up hurdles in lots of ways, 155, 373, the potential additional costs for decommissioning here on the renewable side for resources in Nebraska, and we are not seeing similar focus on restoring the land to its original condition on fossil fuel side. And so I guess just in general, looking across all of the bills in the legislature this year, there are a number of hurdles towards renewable energy and less support for, I mean, quite frankly, economic development in Nebraska. And so foundationally, this is just another piece that I'm disappointed to see that we are moving kind of in opposition to opportunity and in support of old infrastructure that we need to be, identifying paths away from. And so I guess just in general, this seems like another step away from where we want to be getting in the future. And as we're going to talk about how we make that transition in the future toward new energy opportunities, this feels like something that we shouldn't remain not that we're remaining silent, but that we should have an active public voice in saying the new energy economy will be focused on clean energy generation, smart grid distribution across the state and between states, and this is a step against that. And we see a number of steps against that, and that is not in the interest of public power, that is not in the interest of the ratepayers in Nebraska, and we do not support that type of a position. So again, I hope that that's where we are moving long term, because when we look across a number of these bills, we do see things moving in one direction and supporting one type of energy, and it's not the type of energy of the future that we want to be seeing.
Thanks, Director Williams.
What you're saying is that you don't agree that there should be any type of a bill to protect the landowners as far as decommissioning this? Is that what you're saying?
No, I do, but I'm saying there's not parity between different energy sources. That pipeline
okay.
decommissioning is not similar
Yeah.
to the level of comprehensive
Okay.
decommissioning that's being
Yeah,
proposed
but
here.
right now, this is just talking about the decommissioning of the windmills, and I think, just so you're in favor of protecting the landowner as far as decommissioning the windmills.
I am, with the understanding that when other projects are also proposed, that we give similar protection to landowners based on pipelines, for example.
Okay.
And I don't think that's currently in place. And I think that this represents kind of a systemic issue of we default to support for private, for-profit, even international corporate interests to take land under eminent domain from Nebraskans, and we remove the ability of public power to use eminent domain for clean generated energy in Nebraska and add additional decommissioning costs. And so there are several steps in support of
Okay.
foreign fossil fuels and against
Just so I know where you
locally
are on
developed
this bill, though.
renewables.
We're just talking about this bill. Okay.
True, and I guess I'm just saying that there are simultaneous things happening. And in this case, we seem to be setting up costs on one side and not on the other, and that is not supportive of the direction that we want to see moving, see utilities moving in the future.
Thank you. That concludes my report for April.
Okay, next, we have the Governance Committee.
Okay, the governance committee met to go today, April 2nd, at 1:30 in the afternoon. We discussed several items which we'll be getting into today, and also I'll point out that we have 2 items on our agenda today that are will be in closed session at the end of this meeting. Number of things we discussed last week included the board collaboration site. Kate Brown and her staff joined the meeting and gathered information about the board's request for some type of online collaboration space to kind of share industry information to try to see if we can streamline that process a little bit. Second item was a severance agreement. We have two employees who are, well, we have two former employees who received severance agreements from the utility that needs to be reported due to each one exceeding $50,000. And Mart, would you go ahead and maybe give us the particulars on these two cases and where they work and so forth?
Sure. So we have discussed on a number of occasions that we are moving toward an accountable management system for OPPD. As part of that process, we have a redeployment of talent program for exempt employees who do not meet the suitability of a role criteria or don't choose to stay with the district. They are offered severance in exchange for release of claims. We had 2 people recently who opted to leave the organization, one from business strategy and deployment, and one from business technology and building services. Those agreements exceeded $50,000. Therefore, we want to make sure that we're reporting it, as they may be subject to the requirements in the Nebraska revised statutes, and those were attached to your document.
Thank you.
These
Any
are
questions?
good employees, you know.
Yep.
This is not the cause or anything. These are very good employees, but they just don't fit into our new.
Correct.
Yeah.
Other items we discussed included the CEO's performance review. Obviously, annually, we review Tim's performance and make a recommendation on his salary. We discussed the process to see if we can, streamline it and make the process a little clearer if possible. We really have we didn't reach any type of formal agreement or decision on how to proceed in that regard, but we will be looking at this as we move forward, and certainly before Tim's anniversary date comes up, we'll have a process in place.
I'm preparing a letter that very shortly you'll be getting.
Right, but
by April 10th, and we'd like to have everybody give us feedback by April 24th.
Ooh, I was off on the month. I'm sorry, I didn't
Yeah.
realize it was that soon.
Yeah.
You're right.
By April 24th, so we can discuss this at the May 7th meeting.
Okay.
Yeah,
I missed
that's
both.
okay, yeah.
Okay, our next item is, we discussed the board's government workshops. We're looking at, doing a one-day workshop for the entire board and senior management to take place, where we don't have a specific date at this time, but we're looking at sometime late second quarter or into the third quarter of the year, so sometime during the summer. We will do what we can to give as much notice as possible so we can plan accordingly and such.
I
And
think it'd probably be third quarter considering the flood, sort of set everybody back a little bit.
And I'm sure we'll have a more definite agenda put together well in advance as well. Right, strategic directive refinement process. We discussed, the current process of reviewing our strategic directives and also the frequency of any changes that would be made to any of the SDs. We really didn't reach any type of decision in that regard.
Maybe Scott can help us with this, but the idea is that, is it really necessary to bring up each SD every year? And should it be on, maybe some SDs we would bring up every year, but other SDs we wouldn't necessarily have to bring up every year. Scott, if you can maybe.
Well, I think in the spirit, as we talked a lot about continuous improvement and process efficiency, there's 2 components of the policy monitoring and management and refinement. The component, like you saw today with SD3, is really centered around monitoring. There's a schedule for that. It happens on an annual basis. We're not looking at all 12 at once. The current process then would turn that conversation, for example, in SD3, into, are there any changes? What that's created is a constant reworking of policies, and our intention is to pause BL or GP3. The board job says actually that the board would take a deep dive in policy every 3 years. The thought is that's probably not sufficient because there is such a long time over 3 years, but the goal was always to have a strong foundation for these policies. So what we talked about during that meeting was, would it just make sense to have a one day, like maybe part of this governance workshop, to say, are there policies that out of the 15 strategic directives that warrant or no longer really reflect as accurately as you would like the board's perception of the strategic direction? And then you can schedule the refinement and make it less of a monthly event and more of an annual event for the book of policies as a whole. That way it'd also provide, I think, a carve-out opportunity for the board as a body to discuss and reach some level of consensus, or there's a general interest in reviewing specific policies. So in this particular case, as Director Kavanaugh was pointing out, if in June or July there's a workshop, there would be an opportunity to surface those strategic directive policies and identify them, and then they would go back into committee to be worked. But that way, it also, I think, signals to the organization the staying power of these strategic directive policies in a way that I think the board intends, and just the current process doesn't really highlight. Is that helpful?
Yes. And I think this is the place to do this is, you know, to discuss this in detail is, you know, at the workshop and everything, because the next item is the balance of Tuesday, Thursday meetings, and sometimes when we get into the refinement process, it gets way over, and maybe, you know, when we do refinement of these SDs, it would be better to do it, in some cases, at least the beginning, the process would be in the workshop to do that.
And as Ann mentioned, we did discuss the balance of the Tuesday, Thursday meetings, looking at different ideas as far as whether or not we should kind of even out the time commitment for the 2 days, maybe move some items from the Tuesday committee meetings to Thursday during our board meeting, particularly items that may involve presentations that might be of stronger public interest than others, something like that, or if we should leave it alone. We're looking, and you know, another item along the same line we looked at is, you know, currently and historically we've done our closed session items at the conclusion of the meeting, and quite often, you know, these meetings have become quite lengthy, and the closed session discussion items are oftentimes very critical, and it's you're catching the directors sometimes, and maybe I'll show my age a little bit, but catching us at the end of a day, you're a little tired. We're wondering, for efficiency reasons, and this is something that I think the chair would certainly have her prerogative to do if she chose to, but she wanted to have entire board feedback on if this might be a better way to do things. If not, that's okay, we can say it is. But perhaps having these closed session items at the beginning of the meeting, and say, well, one concern there is to the public is we don't know how long those closed session items are going to last, so consequently you might not have a specific start time to the normal portion of the meeting. But we thought, well, we could, if we have a structured amount of time set aside for the closed session items. For instance, if you have an hour and a half's worth of material for closed session, we could start the committee meetings at 8:30, and with the understanding that the drop-dead start time for the normal part of our committee business would be at 10 o'clock, something like that, so the public would know, hey, at 10 o'clock, this is going to be the start of the open meeting. And again, this is a lot to drop on you. Does anybody have any feedback, pro, con, better ideas? You know, we're certainly open to it.
I'll start. I'm for it because I think some of those closed session items, as you mentioned, are the most critical work that we as a board need to do. And so I don't know about my fellow board members, but I'm best mentally in the morning when I'm fresh, you know, with a new cup of coffee and breakfast and a good night's sleep.
You're right.
And that's when I'm going to be able to be the most apt to contribute the best ideas and best feedback for those items. So I'm all for that. I do think given that there has to be a hard stop, so there has to be a really structured agenda with that closed session that's followed very tightly in order to get through all the materials.
Which we should be looking at anyway.
Yeah, perhaps.
Yes.
And we say drop-dead time.
Yeah.
Certainly, if it would be a question of 5 minutes, that certainly isn't critical, but we certainly wouldn't be going half an hour after what we said we're going to start at. That's rude, and wouldn't be appropriate.
And if we didn't have a closed session that day, then everybody gets here at 10 o'clock. That would be good for everyone too, as far as schedule. And, you know, the idea is to hopefully we would have notice of whether or not there can be a closed session, you know, in advance. We'd have to open the meeting and close it at 8:30 in the morning.
And then take the vote to go into executive session.
And we'd have to vote to go into executive session.
Does anyone
And
else
to
have
vote
any
out
other-
of executive session.
We've had a closed session like every meeting for the last 30 meetings, I would guess.
Not all the time.
28th, I think is the exact.
It's pretty normal.
It's gotten pretty normal.
But, anyway, I like the idea. It's a great idea. Trust your judgment on this. One thing on the Thursday meetings, and I know Craig and I and
We've
everyone,
talked about
we've
this
talked
too.
about this.
We talked about this in governance also.
Yeah, just transparency. I think it's good to throw that out there on Thursday. Let the public comment on some of these issues when we can, because this just makes sense. It'll save our time. I'm with Amanda on that too, because then we can devote more to the,
Yeah, that's a good point that we can mention this, because
Executive session.
I would like to try this next month and to institute this next month, and I will mention it at the general board meeting. And it might be that some of the people who do come might enjoy coming a little bit later and not having to bike in so early. I was thinking about you, Mr. Corbin. Okay. Good.
In regards to the strategic directives, so June or July is the timeline when we would be looking to have a workshop, is that right?
Sometime in the middle of summer, right, or at least early middle of summer.
I'm thinking probably July.
And this had come up in one of the orientation meetings, understanding the monitoring report, meaning review of the last year, compared to the policy review, meaning looking forward and if we want to make changes to metrics. So yeah, I'm very interested in understanding how we have aligned those two in the past and how they might not need to be aligned all the time. That might modify or streamline the staff involvement on the strategic directive. I'm also interested in how the metrics, the numeric metrics that we have in the strategic directives are viewed, where some are ongoing and some are accomplishable. And so SD, I'm looking at a couple of them now. 7 has a specific number that we can accomplish, and at that time we would need to update and have a new metric that we would use. 8 has the same thing, employee engagement 85 by 2020, but several others don't have specific accomplishable outcomes.
Which is exactly why we hire Eric Douglas. And as in preparation for this meeting, Eric Douglas is going to be sending out both a written questionnaire and also calling you individually. And we'll be discussing about that type of thing. And he'll get all that data together, bring it together, and then that's what the workshop will be. We are going to define what that workshop is, and you'll have the opportunity to express that to Mr. Douglas and everything. Scott, if you want to add anything else on that? Which is, glad you brought that up. Yeah.
And there's also some things that as we continue to have conversation, just historical, it may be good to take offline and have a conversation. So, because there are some very specific answers to those questions that may provide some information that you'd want and it'd be valuable. So.
I think that will help inform whether or not we need to do an annual review, for example. I mean, if you have a specific metric coming up in 2 years, it probably makes sense to say, are we getting there? But on a 2.0 debt coverage ratio, if we're not intending to change that, is a review, I mean, an update is very helpful to inform where we're going, but if we don't intend to change it,
well,
action not necessary on things that are going to continue forward.
And you have highlighted the 2 measures that are bound by time, but for the rest of it, it was always centered in top quartile driven performance without being bound by time.
Right.
So as we clean up those the policies themselves, I think we would continue to move to a space where it's centered in top quartile performance regardless of time, which would take that update trigger out of the equation, except for if we became aware that there was top quartile performance that shifted a goal that we would want to surface, right, through conversations.
Yeah,
But that, again, it will be part of the workshop.
Yeah, it's part of the workshop. I'm very happy that you brought that up.
Yeah, I'm looking forward
That.
to hearing from Eric about that,
Yes.
other Eric, about that, and engaging on that leading up to the workshop. So thank you for putting that
Right.
together. I think that's great.
Right.
Since the entire board will be there, is that a public meeting?
Definitely.
Okay, very good.
Yeah, it has always been open. Yeah,
Okay.
we don't have the place or anything yet. We're looking into that.
Okay.
Open but no comments.
Yeah, open but no comments, yeah.
Is there any other feedback, particularly on the closed session at the beginning of the meeting? Because it's something Ann would probably like to get rolling on next month. And again, she has a
Yeah.
prerogative, but does anyone else have any feedback or any pros or cons they want to add?
Sure, I think it's a good idea for all the reasons expressed by Director Bogner. The only thing I would say is that closed session, I would hope that we have a careful management of the content that is covered in closed session. back to Director Gay's comment about transparency, I think many times, and you've been responsive to this, and thank you for that, we get information that isn't necessarily just for closed session. And your responsiveness has been, when I've pointed this out, is to then have a similar slide deck come out during the full board meeting.
Correct.
So, so I think it's important for us to make sure that we have boundaries and parameters around the content there, and that we are responsive to the sunshine law.
Yep, absolutely.
It's a privilege we have that we don't want to abuse.
Right.
Yep.
Yep.
I guess.
We pride ourselves by being as most transparent as we can, possibly can.
And maybe even being uncomfortable with the transparency.
And we are, yes.
And we are.
Which is, sometimes we are,
Okay, very
but we
good.
do it, yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, I think you've got your feedback, Ian. so-
Yeah, thank you. So we'll go ahead with that. Well, we'll mention it at the board meeting.
On Thursday.
And,
Okay.
So if there is a closed session next month, it will be at 8:30 in the morning, and the start date, time will be 10 o'clock for the general board committee meeting.
Okay. And the final item we discussed last week was the over $500,000 contracts. We discussed different ways of how we would report these items. If we do so on a monthly basis still, or on a quarterly basis, or what have you. And I don't have my notes in front of me. Was there additional discussion or concerns we had, or changes we wanted to make in how we report it?
Historically, we didn't have to have that reported, but it's only the general, actually, Mr. Bruckner, if you can help us with that. Historically, what are the items that have to be reported? It's over
It's not a statute.
a certain amount, or what is it?
Actually, there isn't any statutory requirement to report contracts over $500,000.
Right.
One of the strategic directives or board linkage policies, to be more states that over $500,000 contracts should be reported to the board, but doesn't specify how they should be reported.
So
And so it's strictly a discretionary activity, and the board could decide that, doesn't need to see those at all, wants to see them less frequently. It's really open from a statutory standpoint as to what you would do.
I think
And-
the topic came up for a couple of
Yeah.
reasons. One was how to make this meeting itself more
Sure.
efficient, and if the reporting requirement wasn't about having in-depth discussion, but just sharing information, would there be a more efficient and effective, and at the same time as transparent way of sharing that information, as having it as a reporting item
Right.
here? And so part of the conversation that we've had as a senior team, and I'll defer to Mr. Fernandez on this, was that it would be perhaps more efficient and more effective and equally transparent to just have that list posted at an appropriate spot on like
Director's
www.oppd.com.
And
So it would be
publicly.
out there and available, and then both like this meeting, customer owners who are interested in seeing it, board members who are interested in seeing it, there would be simply available out on the public domain to see. I don't know if there's anything that you would like to comment on that, Javier.
The only thing I would add is this move would also allow us for more timely reporting. This month in particular is a great example where the systems committee met before the month had ended. We didn't have a list of the reports, and so we all else being equal, we'd have to wait yet another month before we report that to you. Whereas something like this, what Scott mentioned, would allow us to post shortly after the end of the month and just on an ongoing basis, regardless of when the systems committee meets or the committee as a whole meets. That information is just available on an ongoing basis. So that's yet another.
There's nothing, oh, go ahead.
Sorry, they're gonna say, if we make this shift, is it gonna save your team time?
Significant amount of time, yes.
All right, so that's question one, and question two. Today, when we make these public, is the only way in which we're making these public via the board of directors information that's out there? Or alternatively, is there another place?
We have right now, we make a lot of our procurement, supply chain type of information available via OPPD.com.
Yeah.
So one of the ideas would be, let's use that same vehicle
Yeah.
that we're using already to make other type of information transparent and available to report these. It would fit nicely within that.
So yeah, that's exactly right. So rather, if I was interested in what is OPPD spending that's over $500,000, today I'd have to fish through directors' reports to find that. Whereas if we have a single place on the website that's always just continually updated, that's a lot easier for me if I was a public citizen that wanted to find it. There's one place I go to it. I don't have to go through months and months of directors' reports to track.
Well, and just one correction there. Right now, that information is reported to you every month.
Yeah.
On an open basis. It's not even on your reports. It's available on committee materials.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
This would be available to the public at any time.
Right.
It would be refreshed periodically, and you or your neighbor can go in and.
Right.
Yeah, you're both saying the same thing.
Yeah.
So I like the idea of having it posted and being found by the public. There's nothing preventing you from doing that now relative to our current process.
No.
So what you're asking, I think, is it a good idea to have that published? Yes, I agree. I like the idea of at this meeting, then looking at that and having it be an actual, hey, let's talk about what happened.
We discussed that also.
Yeah.
As far as the balance, because it's important for us to maybe, is this a discussion point for us, is what's going on in the district as a whole. So the thought was to maybe, in addition to having it on OPPD.com, to post it in Director's Update. And if there's any discussion about that, the board member can bring that up at the next committee meeting.
Or we would send a memo to the board when we're ready to post it with a description of not just the contract, but the description
We can do one or
of
the
some
other.
qualifier around it, so the board gets that information and
That's
can
why-
direct it to the appropriate VP or VP.
Sure, I'm sensitive to Director Moody's question and your response that let's see if we can't reduce the amount of administrative time here as
Right.
well. But I still think we have the duty to
If there's a
be
question to
seen
ask it, yes.
as actively engaged in this kind of expenditures.
Yeah.
So I guess what I'm hearing and what I'm coming up with is, yes, let's post it. Let's as a board then promise ourselves that we look at what's been posted in the previous month and say something about it.
Unless people want it in the Director's Update, and that's my question. Would you feel more comfortable with that? You're going, no, don't do that.
Well, so.
This is why I'm discussing this,
That one
as far
has
as-
the time-bound issue.
Yeah, then you get
whereas
into
the
more problems with
posting,
time.
it's a lot easier. We can post a lot faster, more accurately, and we don't have to wait for any other reporting process. It's just posted there, right? It allows that flexibility. You can go in and check that at any time. And really, to Director Moody's point, the reason we talked about these, it's really efficiency. Is there a better and a more efficient way to use all of our time here to discuss other topics that we're discussing? And also, is there a more efficient way of using our workforce time, which is already stretched out, without sacrificing transparency? So these might be, that proposal might be.
Yeah, it's a
one that-
transparency element that I hear from the campaign trail. People would talk about the contracts and how much we're spending and so forth. So I think it's important that we maintain visibility there.
And that's good. And if they see it on OPPD.com, they can also send us a note.
Would it be possible, when we're posting them on OPPD.com, to have a push message come with that? Say,
That's what I'm
when you're
saying.
posting on there, that we get a push message that says.
To the board?
It's been updated.
Yeah, that's what I'm asking. Just-
Certainly, I
So-
think that's something.
I think that helps me
Include a link
because,
in the director's report.
A reminder.
that reminder to go into the system and look at it. And I don't want to be looking at it every week or every month and
So
nothing
we don't-
changes.
Mr. Moody's got a suggestion.
But-
I want you to finish, go ahead.
But sometimes if there's an update, to have a push notice is helpful.
Yes, so slight tweak on that would be, I get enough emails so that I don't know that I need every single one. So just a simple
That's the
link
other
in the
thought.
director's update to that page. We posted X, Y, and Z. Here's the link, and then we can go out and get it.
Either
To
way.
me, like that
works.
flow is something we're comfortable with
Right.
and might make more logistical sense.
Yep, that sounds reasonable.
I mean, it's weekly, so it's not gonna be stale by the time it.
It'll probably be monthly.
Yeah,
but,
okay,
yeah.
either way,
Yeah, the director's update, just.
Yeah.
we already got it.
And you'd always bring it up as needed.
We should be looking at OPPD.com anyway,
So-
see what great work they're doing.
So,
No pressure on the director's update here, though, now, that it's gonna make it much more important.
Okay,
Can I ask one more question?
yeah.
On the collaboration page or whatever you're doing, is that only for, can you talk about that a little bit? Because it's not like we can all chat, it's not a chat page.
No, it's
It's
not a
just kind of throw
collaboration site,
articles
no.
or of
It is
interest
not
or-
that,
It
no.
will be a repository, read-only.
Yeah, okay, read
to
all.
get information.
It's a read-only thing, it's just some things that might be good for us to put.
Yeah.
We already have that now.
So can you
because
sketch
of-
that out? What's happening with the collaboration site?
Or what may happen, just.
Or
you
how's
know.
that different than diligent?
Well, Craig, you want to talk about it since you
So,
brought it up?
yeah, so my idea was, I'm continually, as you all are, looking for ways to learn more about what we're doing as directors, and part of that is about what's happening around us in the utility industry and elsewhere. I know that you all have different places you go, different conferences, different podcasts, different emails, whatever that might be. So my intent was to essentially pull out of you and management, what are some resources that I need to make sure I'm paying attention to? That's really the predominant question that I had in my mind. To me, whatever the mechanism is to obtain that information so that I can, okay, I want to know what conferences are coming up in 2019, because I got some money to use. Rather than inefficiently surfing through the web trying to find that stuff, I wanted to tap into the brain trust that's sitting around this table. I don't think that's a ongoing collaboration site. That, to me, that's a once pull out, push some information in. It's not something we're updating on a regular basis. It's simply a resource. And it's also, to me, not the place where new articles are posted. That's diligent, it's working great. This is just simply like, here are 10 good podcasts that are specific to the electricity utility industry. Here's a newsletter, here are 4 conferences that are coming up in 2019 and 2020. There you go. And then if you want to dig in deeper into any of those, then you go to that website, you go to that newsletter, whatever it's going to be.
And this is only for.
That's what I was thinking.
Only for directors to see.
In senior management?
Senior, yeah, to me, I mean,
It's just an internal.
sure.
It's not something like,
Communication.
I'm gonna throw my points of views all over.
No,
and-
not at all.
No,
It is
no,
not
there's
a
no-
place
it's
for
not a blog.
conversation.
Yeah.
Nope. It could literally be a Word document with a list and links.
That's all it
That's
is, yeah.
all, that's all
And
I
Kate,
really
Yeah,
want.
and Kate is going to
By
do that for us.
different
We're working
categories.
together with Mo on this,
Yeah.
to create a
And,
solution for
and
us.
legal-
Yeah, I don't want to complicate it any more than we already.
We already have, maybe the word collaboration made everything
Yeah.
complicated.
Yeah, well, I
Maybe
don't-
it was the wording
I
of
don't
it.
know, that might have
So
been poor choice.
I like that. I
You
like
asked about that
So I
earlier.
just worry about quorum and work product of a
This is just a
board.
resource.
This
Yeah.
is it.
It's just a resource, there's not a blog or
And
anything.
if it's to me, if it's
Just
a
a
list
list.
of conferences, podcasts, and newsletters and websites, then let's share that. I mean,
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
fine.
Yeah.
That's okay. It's all public information anyway.
Yeah,
All
no, I was
good.
just-
I
Yeah.
just.
I shouldn't
Yeah,
hear
let's
this on
Curated
the
public
call.
information is valuable.
Yeah, and we had this conversation in our governance about that issue.
Yeah,
And we would make sure any of those kinds of things, or the discussion, the dialogue, however that's set up, would fit.
right.
No
Yeah, yeah.
conflicts with the law.
Please,
or the intent
yes.
of the law.
Well, I don't
Please.
even think there's much dialogue with this. I think it's a list. It's a list. It was similar, when you asked Sue Kelly, what are some good resources?
Yeah, exactly.
That is exactly what I said. Well, this is exactly what you would ask, is what resources would
Yep.
you suggest? And
Yep.
that is what we're asking to post, yeah.
I agree. It's a great idea.
Okay.
That concludes the open session part of
Okay.
our report. Now, we have a couple of closed session items as well as systems management as well.
Okay.
So we ready to roll on this to go?
Go for it.
All right. I move that the board go into closed session at this time, 10:35 a.m., to discuss, 1, potential strategic initiatives, 2, decommissioning planning, and 3, pending and potential litigation matters. With respect to the discussion of potential strategic strategic initiatives, a closed session is necessary because the potential strategic initiatives will involve discussion of competitively sensitive information that would create a competitive disadvantage to the district if known by its business competitors. I want to point out that this discussion is preliminary and any strategic initiatives that are proposed by the board or management will be presented and discussed in a future public meeting. With respect to Fort Calhoun decommissioning planning, a closed session is necessary to evaluate legal and regulatory matters that are protected by the attorney-client privilege and to evaluate competitively sensitive decommissioning planning details that would create a competitive disadvantage to the district if known by potential vendors for decommissioning work. With respect to pending and potential litigation matters, the closed session is necessary because the discussion will involve legal advice that is covered by the attorney-client privilege and work product that is protected by the attorney work product doctrine. I so move. We need a second?
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second.
Okay, the motion to go into closed session has passed. This closed session will be
Take a
limited.
roll call
Whoops.
vote first.
Oh, vote, sorry.
Bogner,
Yes.
Kavanaugh,
Yes.
Gay,
Yes.
McGuire,
Yes.
Mulhall,
Yes.
Moody,
Yes.
Williams,
Yes.
Yoder.
Yay.
Okay, now the motion to go into closed session has passed. This closed session will be limited to discussion regarding the district's potential strategic initiatives,
Take a break.
decommissioning planning, and pending and potential litigation. No votes or actions will be taken.
I'm gonna do a 5-minute break.
5-minute break, yes. Maybe a 10-minute break. This was gonna be maybe a 10-minute break.